All right. This is the mop-up for May 19th, 2024. I'm David Feldman. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. And we have transcripts of these episodes now. If you would like a free transcript of today's episode, go to shopdavidfeldman.com. Looking at polls is how I cope with election anxiety. Anxiety. It's what happens when humans who have been traumatized attempt to control the future. Anxiety is a physical reaction to uncertainty. It's caused by a sense of powerlessness. And often that feeling of powerlessness, it's rational. Anxiety, however, is irrational. We shake, we sweat. It's the trick our mind plays on our body, convincing us there's something lurking out there. So here's a blast of adrenaline. So we're feeling powerless, and the adrenaline is designed to make us powerful, to give us the strength required to take on whatever is threatening us. But because nothing is actually threatening us, all we're left with is that rush of adrenaline without anyone or anything to use it on. That is what a panic attack is. That's what anxiety is. Adrenaline with no place to put it. The adrenal glands only succeed in getting our hearts pumping and our body shaking. It leaves us terrified and confused. That's basically what generalized anxiety is. Dreading the nonspecific, a vague worry about something in the future, but you don't know quite what it is, and then our adrenal glands start priming our body with hormones we don't need, since there's no real immediate threat and you're shaking and sweating. In high school, if Jeff Diamond threatens to beat me up all the time, more often than not, the worry that Jeff Diamond will beat me up was worse than the reality of Jeff Diamond beating me up. If it was Sunday night and I find myself shaking and sweating, that was my subconscious telling me, tomorrow I'm going to be walking down the hall, I'm going to see Jeff Diamond, and he's going to threaten to beat me up. So I better start pumping fight or flight hormones right now to deal with him here and now. But it's Sunday night. I'm in bed. There's no Jeff Diamond. And I'm suddenly swimming in fight or flight. I'm swimming in fight or flight juices with nobody to fight and no place to fly. That's anxiety. That's terror. That's my subconscious attempting to control the future. That's my subconscious mistakenly trying to protect me by flooding my body with hormones I don't need. David's going to be threatened tomorrow, so let's prime him right now with adrenaline. Then the next day, I see Jeff Diamond. He threatens to punch me, and there's no more anxiety. I'm afraid, but I'm not anxious. I'm fearful, but I'm not terrified. I'm afraid, I'm fearful of getting beaten up, but there's no anxiety because in that moment I know I'm not powerless. I have control. I can fight or I can fly. That's not anxiety. That's fear. Fear is reality. Fear is powerful. It helps you make rational choices. It empowers you to decide whether to run or stay, fight, and in my case, get beaten up. By the way, Jeff Diamond, I looked him up on Facebook. He's now a dermatologist who hosts Drag Queen Story Hour at the Tenafly, New Jersey Library every Sunday afternoon. And I can't help but wonder if growing up, if we had Drag Queen Story Hour, maybe Jeff Diamond wouldn't have been so intent on beating me up. Anxiety is a monster because it's not rooted in reality. It's based on reality. It's based on past trauma, but anxiety is not based on reality. Your body should never be in a state of fight or flight when there's nothing to actually fear. Our brains do this to us because humans, from the time we were swinging from the trees, have been hardwired to be constantly on the lookout for predators. We no longer swing from trees, but we still have predators, and we should be fearful of the real ones. We should not experience anxiety over imaginary predators. Republicans run for office on a platform of anxiety, not fear, anxiety. They know what they're doing. They run on anxiety because anxiety is hard to pin down, and it takes your body over along with your mind. That's why Trump supporters can't think straight. He puts them in a perpetual state of anxiety. Trump creates anxiety for millions of Republicans and then says, only I can fix it. It takes a certain type to fall for this. The migrant crisis is anxiety. It's not real. Crime in our streets is anxiety. It's not real. Crime is coming down. Terrorism committed by Islamic extremists in America, it's anxiety. It isn't real. Getting shot by a white supremacist, that's real, and you should be afraid. But Trump doesn't talk about that because that's something to truly be afraid of. Doesn't make you anxious. Not being able to afford rent is real. Not being able to get an abortion is real. Being afraid of extreme weather and climate change is not anxiety. It's real. Whatever Donald Trump and the Republicans run on is not real. They only run on issues that create anxiety. Anxiety for white people, especially anxiety for straight white people who are male, who at least call themselves male, and of course their subordinate wives. It's no surprise that the more religious you are, the more likely you are to vote for Republicans, because religion is not fear. They like to say religion is fear of God or fear of Jesus, but that's not fear. It's anxiety. Religion is just one big anxiety attack. You are powerless. There is a mean and spiteful God, and you have no idea when or why he's going to strike. The more religious you are, the more likely you're going to look like you're in a state of panic. Take a look at the Orthodox Jews at the Wailing Wall, rocking back and forth. The evangelicals rising from their chairs and screaming, talking in tongues. Religion is one big generalized anxiety attack because it's all about the fear of the unknown. Trump gets that. The Republicans get that. Trump is like Elmer Gantry. He's a preacher. He creates anxiety and then says, only I can make you right with the Lord. Come with me, my children. You'll feel the bliss. For people who hate science, I got to hand it to them. For the people who hate science, Trump, the Republicans, and religion, they have it down to a science. Create an anxiety where none ever existed before, and then convince people to hand you money to make it go away. I am not suggesting that there isn't real anxiety. There is real anxiety based on reality. But anxiety only happens when the immediate threat is not real. Anxiety is a sense memory of an actual threat. For example, if you're black, gay, Hispanic, or a woman here in America, you're always in a heightened state of alert. You have to be, because there's a cop or a boss or a teacher or a man who's looking to hurt you. And that's not imaginary, that's real. And it's hard for your subconscious to turn that off. That's why you can be safe in your bed with the doors locked, but your subconscious will start pumping adrenaline because while you're trying to relax, your subconscious is still trying to protect you by resurfacing previous trauma. That anxiety, that adrenaline is our lizard brain survival instinct telling you to remain afraid at all times, like a lizard. Look at a lizard. You never see a lizard calm, even though there's nothing to be afraid of, at least for the time being. This is why it's never a good idea to hit children. If you hit children, they often spend the rest of their lives never knowing where or when the next beatdown is coming from. It's why it's never a good idea to assault a woman or a member of the LGBT community. It puts their subconscious into a heightened state of alert. It's why it's not a good idea to send our sons and daughters off to war. They come home with PTSD. It's why most of my dad's war buddies from World War II were alcoholics. His generation just sucked it up, and the it they sucked up was scotch and cigarettes. It's also why it's not a good idea to drop bombs on civilians. If they survive, they never forget and spend the rest of their lives waking up covered in sweat. It's also why it's not a good idea to let anyone buy a gun, because they often shoot up schoolrooms or shopping centers, and it leaves the ones lucky enough to survive in a constant state of high alert when, left untreated, results in crippling panic attacks. Despite what Republicans want you to believe, a cruel world doesn't make you tougher. It only makes you prone to panic attacks. I know Republicans disagree, but we were put here to make the world safer for everyone. And you know how conservatives love to say, millennials, they're soft, like that's a put down. I got news for you. Being soft is a good thing. Being soft means your heart is open. Republicans have hard hearts, which is why they don't have hard-ons. The criticism against millennials is they all got trophies, so they all have a sense of entitlement. As though entitlement is a bad thing. Republicans call Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security entitlements because they want it to sound bad. Interesting how the most entitled people in America are always the ones complaining about the entitled. One of the reasons I adore the French is because they lopped the heads off their king and queen and decided everyone's entitled. And apparently, a sense of entitlement doesn't cut into productivity or innovation. France only has a population of 68 million, but still remains the 7th largest economy in the world. Having a sense of entitlement, having a sense that the government or your boss owes you something is a good thing. It makes for a more demanding citizenry. It makes for a better place to work. Like the French, young people here in America refuse to put up with the crap at work that I put up with which means work these days is now filled with fewer and fewer crappy people. I'm not saying there are no more a-hole co-workers or bosses. I'm saying they're going extinct. This past week, Sharon Stone and Liam Neeson issued a joint statement insisting Kevin Spacey be permitted to resume his career. Now, Kevin Spacey has yet to be convicted. That's true. But even Kevin Spacey admits he was, at the very least, an a-hole on the set. Maybe he's never going to be convicted of sexual assault. Maybe he's innocent. But even Kevin Spacey admits he's guilty of creating a hostile workplace. And if he ever is allowed to work again, he won't be creating any more hostile workplaces. Last week, he issued a statement saying, quote, "I've learned my lesson." So, one of the benefits to the Me Too movement is whenever I hear or see someone misbehaving at work, the first thing that comes to mind for me or any clear-headed and rational person is, oh, there's a lawsuit. Someone's getting fired. Someone's getting a huge settlement. Anang Mittal was in charge of Speaker Mike Johnson's digital team up until 2 days ago. According to Notice, Mittal's superiors at Speaker Johnson's office called him in and said they received numerous complaints from co-workers about his quote-unquote outbursts inside Speaker Johnson's office. So Anang Mittal, according to Notice, quit. I don't know if this guy created a hostile workplace. The reporting on him suggests he did. But what's important is that Speaker Mike Johnson is a hardline, right-wing supporter of Donald Trump, who is an adjudicated rapist. The Republicans loathe sexual harassment lawsuits. They say to women, grow a pair. But because of people, especially millennials who speak up, because of people, especially millennials who insist workplace laws be obeyed and enforced, now even Speaker Mike Johnson's office is disciplining workers over their quote-unquote outbursts in the office. Nobody's saying grow a pair. Nobody's saying walk it off. The American workplace is changing for the better because younger employees have a sense of entitlement. They see no value to Bob in accounting, breaking phones, or smashing coffee mugs. When I was young, Bob in accounting would be referred to as a passionate guy who really cares about the job. Now, Bob's a psycho. How many careers, when I was starting out, were derailed by Bob in accounting? How many unnecessary panic attacks were caused by Bob in accounting? And more importantly, for you MAGA morons who say everything is all about dollars and cents, how many hours of productivity were lost because Bob in accounting was an a-hole? Abusive bosses and abusive co-workers are bad for the bottom line. There was no value to my living in fear that Jeff Diamond was going to beat me up in high school. It didn't make me tougher. It didn't make me a better scholar. It made me a worse student because it made me harder. It made it harder for me to concentrate. There was no value in my living in fear of getting beaten up. Zero. I've been in actual situations in offices where staplers and baseballs, hardballs, were thrown right at my head by a coworker, and the guy I'm getting angry. Hang on. And the guy in charge of that coworker was too afraid of that guy who was throwing staplers and baseballs at my head. He was too afraid of him to tell him, to order him to stop. I had a job where a guy working underneath me, I was in charge of him. He was threatening me physically, leaving threatening texts and messages. And I reported him to the person in charge of me, who said I should live with him because he's dangerous. Don't provoke him. This was right around, but before the Me Too movement. Way before the Me Too movement, I had a coworker who refused to flush the toilet in our office's one unisex bathroom. I've talked about this over the years. People would be working, and suddenly you'd hear coming out of the unisex bathroom a high-pitched scream from me. By the way, this guy is still getting hired. He would order the foulest fast food you can imagine, eat it in the break room with a cold, harsh look on his face, and we all knew the foulness he was conceiving. We all knew one of us would bear witness to the afterbirth. And this went on for months inside our one unisex bathroom. Guys stopped shaving, women stopped wearing makeup, but I did drop 15 pounds, so there was that. We all complained to management. First thing I was asked when I went in to complain was, how can you be sure? When I went in to complain, the first thing I was asked is, how can you be sure it's his? And I said, well, there are people whose desks are near the unisex bathroom. Someone goes in, and then someone goes out. We see that. The next person goes in, then goes out. The next person goes in, then goes out. The next person goes in, and 1 second later screams at the top of their lungs and takes the rest of the week off. Okay? Through the simple power of deduction, we've been able to divine the person who used the unisex bathroom right before the person came screaming out of it. We know who the mad squatter is, especially since it keeps happening, and it always happens immediately after the mad squatter used our unisex bathroom. And I was told by senior management, who worked in a different wing of the building with his own personal toilet, well, obviously he's mentally ill, and we can't fire someone for being mentally ill. Then we're looking at a lawsuit. I said, okay, do you mind giving me the key to your private bathroom? Upon which I was told I was teetering on the edge of insubordination. 3 months of this shit. Literally. I hate this guy. I'm almost tempted to tell you his name. To do that in a unisex bathroom with women around? Here's the worst part. I need to calm down. I ran into the mad squatter a few years ago at the farmer's market on Fairfax in Los Angeles. He's there with his wife and kids. He sees me, he goes, "Hey, Feldman, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh, I'm divorced." The mad squatter hears that. He puts his arms around his wife, gives her a big hug like he's squeezing one out, and says, that's sad. That's sad. I'm divorced. My kids stopped talking to me. I'm holed up in someone's unfurnished basement in Encino, sleeping on a futon. But the mad squatter, he lives happily ever after. God damn it. And people are still hiring him. Where was I? God damn it. Anxiety. God damn it. Like many of you, I'm prone to anxiety. I don't know if you know that about me. I'm prone to anxiety from trauma that stems from that happily married prick who didn't flush. You never recover from something like that. And I have major anxiety over November's election. I fear that Trump is going to win. But it's mostly a generalized anxiety. I am terrified Trump is going to win. Terror and anxiety are irrational. It's probably irrational because Trump's not going to win. Plus, if he does win, I'll know what to do. And that is fight for my country. Or flight. Get on a flight to Canada. It's the not knowing that creates the anxiety. In fact, I will feel better if Trump wins than I feel right now not knowing if he's going to lose. That's what anxiety is. It's the powerlessness of not knowing. If Trump wins, however, I will join the hundreds of millions of loyal Americans who will fight for our country. We'll protest. I'll write letters. I'll boycott and protect from Canada. There's fight or flight. I'm going to try fight and flight if Trump wins. Or more like flight and then fight. First, I fly out of here and then I fight, unless I end up in Portugal or some of my glorious listeners give me a place in New Zealand or Australia. We have a lot of listeners in New Zealand or Australia. And in November, it's spring down there. Back to my anxiety attacks. Right now, loyal Americans like me who love their country have a sense of dread because we feel powerless. Sure, we can work for the Democrats, make all the calls, and donate. That provides some temporary illusion of power. But in the back of all our minds, in our deep subconscious, we still don't know for certain that doing everything we're supposed to do will keep that orange spray-tanned turd from returning to the Oval Office, and so we're left with generalized anxiety. One of the ways I mistakenly attempt to control the future is by poring over the polls. I find the polls comforting. They trick me into a sense of certainty that even if Trump wins, if the Democrats lose the Senate and the Republicans keep the House, at least I was reading the polls, so I was prepared. I knew what was coming. It won't be a repeat of 2016 when I was certain Hillary was going to win. As I said earlier, anxiety is based on a previous trauma. It's a sense memory of a previous trauma. Right now, all of us, or at least my listeners, are suffering panic attacks and generalized anxiety based on the sense memory of what happened to us in 2016. I was at Hillary's victory party. I was in New York City. I was there working with Triumph, the insult comic dog. I was so certain Hillary was going to win, I was already starting to hate her and everybody in that room. We were watching the election results. I was so certain that she was going to win, I had nothing but contempt for everybody in that room. I remember walking in there saying to my friend Brian, I said, of course I voted for Hillary, but do we really want 8 more years of the Clintons? Yes. Hillary Clinton right now would be wrapping up her second term. Yes. We really needed 8 more years of the Clintons, please. What was so devastating that night for me was nobody saw it coming, especially Trump. But if I had read the polls back then more carefully, I would have seen the major shift in the final days of that election. It was shaping up to be a tighter election than any of us were paying attention to. She won the popular vote, but the swing states were tight. They were very tight until the last couple of hours, and then they started breaking slightly for Trump. We're talking something like, 76,000 votes going for Hillary in 3 states instead of Trump, and then she wins the popular vote and the Electoral College. This was unlike any other election. This is a map. Let me go full screen here. I find this fascinating, and I find it calming. This is like election ASMR. So this is a map from a website called 270 to Win, and it's the general consensus. It's a map of the general consensus of the top pollsters the night before the election. So if you averaged what the top pollsters were predicting, they said Hillary wins with 274 or more. We're not sure. Trump gets 197, but the rest is too close to call. They could, every pollster got it wrong, except the Trafalgar Group. They saw it. But to the credit of all the pollsters, near the very end, they all knew something was shifting, and it was going to be much tighter. But none of us paid any attention because none of us, it was just unimaginable that Hillary Clinton wouldn't win. I know the Trafalgar Group was the only pollster who got it right. I also think Michael Moore saw problems in Michigan. Leave a comment. That's what I'm remembering right now. Didn't Michael Moore, wasn't he saying Michigan is going to go to Trump? The top pollsters had Hillary winning, but winning with a little more than 270. And they all had the swing states too close to call. NBC was only willing to guarantee Hillary 274 electoral votes, 4 more than she needed. The Cook Political Report would only give her 278. The polling group 538 would only guarantee that Hillary got 272. The Associated Press, which is the gold standard of election results, they were only willing to give Hillary 274 the day before the election. NPR gave her 274. You need 270 to win. ABC only willing to give her 274. This was a really hard election to poll because you never had anybody like Donald Trump before. And they got the popular vote right. They just got the Electoral College wrong. But they were kind of right that the toss-up states were going to be too close to call. So once again, this is the consensus map of all the top pollsters back in 2016. 274 for Hillary, 197 for Trump. And look at this. This is what I've been telling you. She needed Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. The consensus was those 3 were leaning blue, but not solidly. So it's not like they got it, It's not like the pollsters got it completely wrong. And here's the final result from 2016. See this? Where am I? What's happening? Here we go. These are the final results. What happened? Clinton got 227 electoral votes. Trump wins with 304. She won the popular vote. But look at that. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania go to Trump. And that's something like 70,000. If you add up what she lost by in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, it's something like 75,000 votes. Had they gone the other way, she would have won the Electoral College and the popular vote. Here's 2020. And this helps me not have anxiety looking at these maps. Biden gets 306, Trump 232. And Biden wins the popular vote by 7 million. There's the blue wall. Take a look at that. You got your Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Biden won, right? Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. That's all Hillary needed. And then he picks up Georgia and Arizona, which he didn't need. She didn't win Arizona and Georgia. He did. He didn't need those two states. He would have won without them. So they got it wrong in 2016. But I do find this calming. Going over polls is calming. It reminds me of when I was a kid and how I pored over baseball stats. I was a Mets fan, and I would study the ERA of the pitcher the Mets would be batting against because I thought I could control the outcome by proving to myself there's no way they can lose. Eventually, the Mets started winning, but by that time, I discovered more important things like getting stoned and making phony phone calls with Howie Greenberg and Jeff Tatarian. Much more enjoyable than watching the Mets making phony phone calls. By the way, there are entire generations of children who have no idea what phony phone calls are. Entire generations of children who have never even listened to the Jerky Boys. People don't answer their phones anymore. That's why nobody makes phony phone calls. And that's why it's commonplace these days to hear, don't listen to the polls. They're always wrong because they only talk to people who are stupid enough to answer their phone. I say that all the time. I know it's wrong, but I say it because, I don't know, but it's wrong. It may have been true in the past, but polling in the past decade has gotten way more sophisticated. More sophisticated since 2016. 2016 was the wake-up call to stop depending on calls. Look, this is really important. Polling is really important. And polling is a lot more accurate than a lot of you like to believe. And in a little while, I'm going to spell out why it's bad for democracy to constantly denigrate pollsters. We need pollsters to check the accuracy of election results. All over the world, in fledgling democracies, pollsters are used to certify election results, to prove they weren't stolen. If a candidate's polling average shows a 10-point lead, but then he goes ahead and loses, that says the election was stolen. Pollsters keep elections honest. So when you trash polls in general, when you just dismiss all polls, it's kind of like Donald Trump trashing Judge Juan Merchan. If the American people lose faith in the pollsters, then it's easier to claim voter fraud. Polling is way more accurate than you realize, the 2016 upset notwithstanding. Somebody complained that I'm slurping coffee on the show. Like, that's annoying one of my listeners. Somebody wrote to me, I can't listen to you anymore because you slurp coffee. Anyway, how many upsets have there been in your lifetime? How many nail biters have there really been? Not many. Okay, 1960, 1968 were tight, but that was before any of you were born. Most of you were born, and it's way before polling got sophisticated. In the modern era, 2000 was the first nail biter, and then there was 2016. So, in the modern era, we've had two nail biters, 2000 and 2016. Now, last show, I talked about 2004, Bush versus Kerry. Up until Election Day, the pollsters predicted Bush winning by, at the very least, 276 electoral votes. The consensus was Kerry was going to lose. If you remember the last show, I said what the pollsters got wrong was their exit polls on the day of. The general consensus of the pollsters the night before Election Day 2004 was Bush wins. It was the exit polls on the day of that they got completely wrong. One of the reasons we don't see too many upsets is because polling has gotten so sophisticated. And one of the reasons landslides or even big wave elections are next to impossible is because Democrats and Republicans, through very sophisticated polling, have learned how to hive off slivers of positions on key issues to make it much harder for one candidate to dominate, to be incredibly more desirable than the other. I'm going to talk about abortion here for a sec. I'm going to show you what I mean with abortion. Trump and abortion. This is the power of polling. Trump knows this election is about abortion, and he doesn't want it to be. And he knew this a year ago. He knows this election will be decided by suburban women living in the swing states. He knew this a year ago. So he's taken a much more moderate stance on abortion. He's against the national 15-week abortion ban that Senator Lindsey Graham introduced. Trump reads the polls, the good ones. And while he can't suddenly become pro-choice like he used to be, he can say he's for states' rights. He can say, and that's what he's doing, he's saying leave it to the states to decide. That's smart. For low information voters who don't care about abortion, that makes him seem like he's almost pro-choice. It's a smart move to frame it as a states' rights issue. Politically, that's the smartest thing for Trump to do. It's the only thing he can do with abortion, given that he owes his first victory to the white evangelical vote. This is the only thing he can do to control abortion from turning into a landslide against him. Trump said, leave it up to the states. And then Arizona Republicans wanted to enact an 1864 era abortion ban. So at the beginning of May, he got on the phone and worked the legislators, the Republican legislators in Arizona, to repeal the 1864 abortion ban. He said, if you don't repeal this, we're going to lose. They're still going to lose, Arizona. And after the dust settled, abortion now will be illegal in Arizona after 15 weeks, no exceptions for rape or incest. And how did they come up with that? Through polling. They poll on how many weeks are acceptable to undecided voters in an attempt to make abortion less of a deciding factor in November. Trump is still going to lose because of abortion, but he's carved out a smart position. And this position before Iowa, he carved it out. You might remember, if you're a listener to the show, that I said before Iowa he was making a huge mistake. I was wrong. I said he was making a huge mistake in Iowa, alienating the white evangelicals, when he was saying, leave it up to the states, no national abortion ban, when he was saying, make exceptions for rape and incest. I said he was making a big mistake doing that in Iowa. I said Trump should do what all Republican politicians do, work the right flank in Iowa, lie to the evangelicals, and then move towards the middle after the convention, but don't piss off the evangelicals in Iowa. I said he's making a mistake. He's running a national campaign in Iowa, but he was right. He won in Iowa. The evangelicals all endorsed DeSantis, but to Trump's credit, he staked out an early, consistent, and disciplined position on abortion. Very unlike him. He's usually all over the map. He's been consistent on abortion. He'll say 100,000 different things about tax cuts, Obamacare, but on abortion, he has been disciplined because he knows this is what the election is about. From the very beginning of the year, he's been saying it's settled law, the Dobbs decision. Leave it up to the states, that's it. And he has said to the evangelicals privately, I don't want to hear about it anymore. He's a horrible man. It's a horrible position. But politically, it's the only position he can take without losing even more of the female voters in the suburbs he's going to eventually lose. But that's polling. That's reading really expensive polls that we don't get to see. Polling is really important. Trump was in Minnesota this weekend. Why? Because the polls are showing cracks in Biden's wall in Minnesota. Biden last week campaigned in North Carolina. Why? Because the polls show, if you look very closely and you read the right polls, Biden's going to beat Trump in North Carolina. It'll be the first time a Democratic presidential candidate wins North Carolina since Obama and Biden won it in 2008. I think. Let me know in the comments section. I don't think Obama won North Carolina in 2012. Yeah, I'm positive Biden and Obama won North Carolina in 2008. And Biden is going to win North Carolina in 2008 if you're looking at the right polls. Now, I've gotten pushback from listeners who say, stop talking about the polls. They mean nothing. You're wrong. They mean everything, especially the reliable polls. Saying polls can't be trusted is like saying the news media can't be trusted. It all depends on which media you're looking at. It all depends on which polls you're looking at. I trust, when it comes to media, I really have very little patience with people who say, I can't trust CNN or the New York Times or the Washington Post. Mainstream media, if you know how to view it and read it, you'll know what's going. If I trust CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Miami Herald, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. Yes, they get things wrong, and their editorials are often right-wing or too centrist for me, but they're trying to get the facts. And yes, sometimes they present their facts so the story leans in a way I don't like. But if you possess critical thinking, it allows the reader to cut through what little bias there is. You can find out what's really going on. If you go to the BBC, Al Jazeera, Haaretz, there are The Guardian. You can find out what's going on. Look, I once asked Noam Chomsky. I ask anybody important who I meet, I ask them, what's your reading? What do you read? And Noam Chomsky said, the New York, if you know how to read the New York Times, you will know a lot of things. Critical thinking allows you to pick through the information in the New York Times and allows you to decide what the front page story should be. That's kind of what Noam Chomsky has said in the past. He said there are a lot of front page headlines buried inside the New York Times. I'm paraphrasing Noam Chomsky. He says that's why he reads the New York Times. There are a lot of front page headlines buried inside the pages of the New York Times. So if you possess critical thinking, you can decide what the front page story is by reading the New York Times. The bias is in what the Times or the Washington Post or Haaretz or Al Jazeera or the BBC or the Miami Herald, the Los Angeles Times, Chicago Tribune. The bias is in what they decide to lead with. If all you do is read headlines or the first paragraph, then yes, you're going to fall prey to the New York Times' bias as to what is important. But if you possess critical thinking and try to read the entire story, you can decide what the real story is. You can decide what the real takeaway is. How do I, my nonsense that I spew, I talk to people I trust, but most of where my thoughts come from is by reading mainstream media and Jacobin and, the Nation and goes, but if you read the whole story and then if you can remember things and if you can make connections and see patterns, that's critical thinking. If you read the Times or the Washington Post, they're giving you indisputable facts. If they get it wrong, they correct themselves. If you have critical thinking, you can piece those facts together and draw your own conclusions. That's what doing your own research means. It doesn't mean going to obscure websites or QAnon chat rooms. It's reading legitimate news and piecing together the indisputable facts from legitimate news organizations. Bias, this is really important. If you're young, if you've never taken a class in journalism, the bias in responsible journalism is found inside what is called the inverted pyramid. I think that's what it's called, right? The inverted pyramid. No. Or is it the pyramid? Well, forget, it's some kind of pyramid. The idea is, let me know in the comments section. It's either I think they called it the inverted pyramid, I think, or just the pyramid. Well, I think it's the inverted pyramid, but metaphorically. In other words, you start your story with what the reporter thinks the most important information is, and then you work your way down to the least important information. If you want to see this in action, go to the Associated Press's website and read their reporting. If you want to learn how to be a reporter, read the Associated Press website and donate to the Associated Press. There's your good old-fashioned, reliable journalism over at the Associated Press. They start with what the reporter and the editor think is the most important. They put it at the top. And then as you read, you see it important, less important, less important, less important, some color, maybe some context, and then some trivial sidebar, and that's the end of the story. So by the time you get to the bottom, you're at the absolute bottom is where the reporter and the editor put what they consider to be the least important part of the story. That's the bias. How a news organization arrives at what's important is the bias. But all the facts are there. You, the reader, you got to read the entire story and you decide what information is the most important. Critical thinking, if you're young and you don't quite know what critical thinking is, it flows from reading all the way down to the bottom of the story, if you can put up with it. A lot of this crap is boring. What the journalist thinks isn't important may be important to you. The truth is there. You just have to read more than the headline. If you read more than the headline, then you don't end up sounding like Jimmy Dore. Anyway, back to polling. Jimmy's problem is he doesn't read. He just watches television and reads a headline and goes with outrage. And then somebody tells him something and goes, "How come I didn't know that?" And I used to say, "Because you don't read, Jimmy. You should read." Anyway, back to polling. If you want to know why Joe Biden or Donald Trump are for or against something, it's because they polled it. Or there's a big chunk of money in it for them. It's either donations or polls. That's it. That's what rules politics and government. Money and polling. Trump, for example, was all against TikTok. When he was president, he was saying, we got to ban TikTok, China, China, China. And that worked for him because it polled well. And but then the Club for Growth, a conservative group, met with Trump earlier this year, and they said, you should be for TikTok. And he said, why? And they said, because the guy who donates to Club for Growth, and we donate to you, Jeff Yass, he donates to Club for Growth. He's probably going to donate to you. He also owns a major stake in TikTok. And then Kellyanne Conway became a lobbyist, an unregistered lobbyist for TikTok. And suddenly, Donald Trump doesn't want TikTok banned. Trump said something like, I'm against banning TikTok because it would benefit Facebook. No, banning it would benefit YouTube, not Facebook. But the polling shows don't go after YouTube, go after Facebook. He knows what he's saying. He polls Facebook and YouTube. YouTube is more respected and loved in this country than Facebook is. So he says, I changed my mind because if we ban TikTok, it would only benefit Facebook. When in fact, it would benefit YouTube. That's how Trump studies the polls and chooses to attack Facebook instead of YouTube. Again, if you want to know why a politician says or does something, read the polls and pay attention to who their donors are. Find out who Jeff Yass is. He donates to Club for Growth. He donates to Trump. He owns a major stake in TikTok. Suddenly, Trump changes his position on TikTok. This is how candidates determine policy and how they govern when they're elected. What are the polls telling me? What are the donors telling me? That's it. As I keep saying, polls may not predict November, but they can give us a pretty accurate idea of where things stand today. At least the good polls. There are good polls and there are bad polls, the same way there are good news organizations and bad news organizations. CNN is good. Fox is evil. New York Times, good. The Epoch Times is evil. Ever see commercials for the Epoch Times? It's owned by Falun Gong, an ultra-conservative religion. I think they're out of China. They're against women, the LGBTQ plus community. They believe their leader can walk through walls and self-levitate and predict the future. It's a religion that's also anti-medicine, anti-science, and anti-vax. I think it's banned in China, I think. Like I said, there are good news organizations and bad news organizations. There are good polls and bad polls. You just need to know which ones to trust. And the polls that you can trust are showing, the internals are showing a blowout for Joe Biden come November. Nathaniel Rakich is a senior elections analyst over at 538. Last year, he wrote that the 2022 midterms were the most accurately polled elections in U.S. history. The pollsters got 2022 right. I'm losing patience with some of my listeners who say stop talking about the polls. The pollsters, the good pollsters, did pretty well in 2020. Okay? Okay. I was going to do a short show this morning because I want to talk about Giuliani. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow morning because I want to talk about Giuliani. But I'm really angry about this because it pisses me off when people say all the polls are wrong. Trump wants you to say that. I'm going to show you something here, okay? Election day was November 3rd, 2020, okay? So this is Arizona. This is the consensus of the top pollsters in Arizona. Arizona was a surprise toss-up state. Look how well the pollsters did and how well they didn't do, okay? I'll come back to this. This is Arizona. These were the final results in Arizona, okay? And the top pollsters got it right. You might remember Fox News' election desk was the first one to call Arizona for Biden. And people were shocked. But all the internals in the hours leading up to the 2020 election showed Biden winning in Arizona. Okay? What the pollsters got wrong was how close it was going to be. That's what they got wrong. The average pollster, I don't know if you can see this, I've gone big screen here. The average pollster had Biden beating Trump by a little more than 2 percentage points. The polling averages for Arizona, Biden gets 48% of the vote, Trump gets 45.8%. The NBC Marist poll turned out to be the most accurate, but they got it wrong. But they were the most accurate. They said it was too close to call. They said 48% to 48%. That was the most accurate poll. They were saying it's too close to call. Data Orbital came the closest by predicting Biden would beat Trump by 1 percentage point. Well, Biden beat Trump by 0.4 of a percentage point. The New York Times Siena poll, which is one of the most accurate pollsters in the country, got it right, predicting Biden would win, but they said he'd beat Trump by 6 percentage points. So they were way off, but they got it right. And the Trafalgar Group, remember them? They were the only pollster that got 2016 right. They were way, way off when it comes to Arizona. They had Trump winning by 3 points. So, on a macro level, the pollsters got Arizona right. On a micro level, not so much. It was much tighter than most of them predicted. But the consensus was Biden wins, and the Electoral College, except for Nebraska and Maine, is winner take all. So all you need to do if you're a pollster is just predict who's going to win the state. And Arizona, they got it right. Okay, let me show you something absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible. Okay? This is the 2020 election map. Biden wins 306, Trump 232. If you look at this map, you see Georgia, a blue state in a sea of red. Georgia, in the lead up to the 2020 election, they said might be in play, maybe in play. Okay? Look how close it turned out to be. This is incredible. Look how close Georgia was. 11,000 votes and some change. Biden beat Trump by 0.3 of a percentage point. Okay? I'm going to show you something that's incredible. Biden beat Trump by 0.3 of a percentage point in Georgia. How did the pollsters do? Incredible. The average poll, the consensus, had Biden beating Trump by 0.2 of a percentage point. They were off by 0.1. Let me go big here. This is incredible. They were off by 0.1 of a percentage point. So to my listeners who say polls are worthless, I'm glad you listened to the show, and I don't want you to stop listening, but I'm afraid we disagree. I think what you're doing is basing your judgment on anecdotal evidence, which on this program don't fly. You know, Steve Buscemi got punched in the face here in New York, but that doesn't mean the overall crime rate in New York is going up, okay? Steve Buscemi can get punched in the face, and the crime rate, violent crime in New York City, can still be going down. Anecdotal evidence doesn't fly on this show. Okay? Yes, the landmark poll here in Georgia shows Trump beating Biden by 4 points in Georgia. Okay? Yeah, you want to point to anecdotal evidence and say, oh, the landmark poll got it completely wrong. You can't. I mean, I'm holding my tongue here. This makes me so. I don't want to hear anecdotal evidence. Yes, the landmark poll showed Trump winning Georgia by 4 points. But the average of, when you tally up the averages, the pollsters came within 1/10 of 1 percentage point. They got Georgia absolutely right. It's incredible. And there's a reason, and this is why it makes me angry. There's another reason it's bad for Democrats to attack the pollsters. That's what Trump does. Polling is a very competitive institution that we need. And there's a scorecard at the end of the election cycle. They either get it right or they get it wrong. The scorecard is tallied up at the end. It's transparent. We know who the good pollsters are and we know who the bad ones are. We need pollsters to maintain the sanctity and integrity of our elections. They are the umpires who tell us whether or not an election is on the up and up, especially overseas where elections really are rigged. I don't mean to turn, I'm glad that my listeners leave comments and write to me. I don't mean to, and this is why I'm saying this. I'm grateful for the comments and the emails you send me because it informs my decisions on what I want to talk about. And I'm sorry, you're wrong for telling me to stop talking about polls. It's exactly what Trump wants. He wants to discredit the pollsters. It's easier to steal an election or claim an election as stolen if nobody trusts the polls. There's a RICO trial down in Georgia charging Donald Trump and 18 others with election interference. As you saw, that election was incredibly close, and Trump tried to convince the Republican governor, the Republican Secretary of State, and the Republican-controlled Georgia legislature that the Democrats stole the election from him. He had zero evidence. And what worked against Trump, one of the reasons the Republican governor, the Republican Secretary of State, the Republican-controlled legislature, one of the reasons they ignored Trump was they knew what the pollsters were saying. They knew before Election Day, the consensus was this was going to be an incredibly tight race, but Trump was going to lose. So when you discredit pollsters, you're doing exactly what Trump wants. If polling averages lose their authority, it's easier for Donald Trump to say an election was stolen. In early December of 2020, a month after Trump lost to Biden, Paxton, the Attorney General of Texas, who's I've talked about that piece of work, he filed a lawsuit before the Supreme Court urging the court to overturn election results in Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The court rejected the case. Mike Johnson, who is now our speaker, wrote an amicus brief, although Liz Cheney says he didn't write it. He put his name on it, but she says it was written by somebody in Trump's Oval Office. But anyway, he signed an amicus brief in support of the Texas Attorney General filing this lawsuit. And Speaker Johnson got more than 100 House Republicans to sign the amicus brief. The lawsuit and Mike Johnson, who's a liar, un-American, unpatriotic liar, the amicus brief he put his name to and the lawsuit, based on zero evidence, said there were election irregularities in the swing states, in the 5 swing states that Joe Biden won. Okay. Look at Pennsylvania. Biden beat Trump by 1.2 percentage points. Compared to Arizona or Georgia, that's not close. That's more than 80,000 votes. Okay? Look at the polling averages. How did the pollsters do? Pennsylvania, right? The average poll showed Biden beating Trump by a lot. The average pollster shows Biden beating Trump by almost 4%, 3.7 percentage points. So on a macro level, the polls got it right. They said Biden would win. On a micro level, they were off. It was much closer than the pollsters predicted. By the way, the Trafalgar Group, which got 2016 right, they show Biden losing Pennsylvania by 2 points. He won Pennsylvania. Okay, let's go to Michigan. Look at Michigan. Biden wins by 2.8 percentage points. That's a lot. 2.8 percentage points. Trump screamed voter fraud. So let's look at the polling averages in Michigan. They show, let me do the math here. What is that? 49.9% for Biden, 44.4% for Trump. The polling averages in Michigan show Biden beating Trump by, 5.5 percentage points. They were off by 2.7 percentage points. Again, they got the results right. They predicted Biden would win by a much larger margin. Instead, he won by 2.8 percentage points. But how can anyone, when you look at the consensus of the polls, how can anyone claim election fraud? When Biden wins Michigan by 2.8% and the consensus was he'd win by 5.5%, he clearly won Michigan. See why polls are important? And finally, Wisconsin, part of the Texas Attorney General's lawsuit that the Supreme Court wouldn't listen to. Biden beats Trump in Wisconsin by, 0.6? Am I doing that right? 0.6 of a percentage point? Incredibly close. And how did the pollsters do? They got it right, but they also got it incredibly wrong. They got it right on a macro level, micro level, not so much. Look at that. They said Biden would win, but by a little more than 9 percentage points. They kind of predicted a landslide in Wisconsin, but they got it right, and they also got it wrong. They got the important thing right, that Biden was going to win Wisconsin. So the important thing to remember moving forward is Joe Biden won 5 states that Trump won in 2016: Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And Trump in 2020 refused to accept that. Rudy Giuliani lost nearly 60 court challenges to reverse those election results in the lead up to January 6. And then the Supreme Court refused to take Texas's lawsuit challenging these results. There was zero evidence of voter fraud. And one of the reasons there was zero evidence is the polls said so. The pollsters got it right in every single one of those 5 key states. They were way off in Wisconsin, but they got it right. They were within 1/10 a percentage point in Georgia. They got it right. Perfect. In Michigan, Arizona, and Pennsylvania, they were off by a few percentage points, but they got it right. So don't discount the polls. We need polls to prove there was or wasn't voter fraud. Again, it's become commonplace. I'm going to wrap it up. To discount polls by saying they only measure people stupid enough to answer their phones, or the pollsters are biased and they want to create the illusion of one candidate doing better than they actually are. Rasmussen, you should not trust the Rasmussen poll. It's a Republican poll. So it's partly true, but there are legitimate pollsters who work to be accurate because numbers don't lie, and eventually the votes are counted, and we can tell the pollsters that get it right and the ones who fail miserably. According to 538, the most accurate pollster in the last election cycle, 2022, was Suffolk University. And their latest poll of 1,000 registered voters as of May 3rd shows it's going to be a dead heat in November. If it's a dead heat now, Biden wins big in November. The second most accurate polling from 2022 was the New York Times Siena College poll. Their latest poll is a month old, and it shows a dead heat. Trump is leading by 1 point. It's within the margin of error. That's a dead heat. Trump has a ceiling. So that's showing a dead heat. A more recent New York Times poll through Ipsos, not Siena, shows Biden beating Trump by 4. Some of the top 10 pollsters from 2022 haven't been polling, so I had to go down to the 6th most accurate poll from 2022, and that would be Beacon. And Beacon's most recent poll has Trump up by 1%. That's within the margin of error. That's a dead heat. Marist was the 7th most accurate poll from 2022. Marist polls very frequently when they're hunting wabbits. Marist polls frequently. Their latest poll 3 weeks ago shows Joe Biden up by 2 percentage points. Dead heat within the margin of error. So, what does this mean? It means nationally it's a dead heat. But that doesn't mean if the election were held today, it would be a dead heat. Because if the election were being held today, voters would be paying attention, and they're not. So if it's a dead heat before voters are paying attention, Biden is going to win big in November. This election will break big for Biden the closer we get to election. I live in New York. Early voting in New York starts on October 26. A lot of people right now, think they're voting for Trump. A lot of people say and threaten that they're voting for Trump. But they're not paying attention until October. And once Americans start paying attention, once the Trump amnesia dissipates and people come out of their fog and remember what the Trump presidency was actually like, it's going to break big in Biden's favor. Maybe not in the popular vote. Maybe, he'll get 7 million more than Trump did, like he did in 2020. But it's going to break in Biden's favor big in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, because Biden, because you don't live. Ask the people who live in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan what it's like trying to listen to the radio or watch television. Biden is spending a fortune in those 3 states, and he's going to win. Trump is spending a fortune, but on lawyers. If this is what it is now, before the June 27th debate, when Biden is going to hand Trump's flabby ass to him, it's going to break big in North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, maybe not Georgia. Most definitely because Ruben Gallego is running against Kari Lake in Arizona. It's going to break big for Biden in Arizona. I know it's hard for my listeners to believe this, but of the 155 million Americans who either voted for Trump or Biden in the last election, only a couple of million wake up every morning hating Donald Trump or hating Joe Biden. Of the 155 million, most are not thinking about anything remotely related to Election Day. They're thinking about work, getting fired, switching jobs, raising their kids, taking care of a loved one who's sick, taking care of their grandchildren. They're wondering why their neighbor's lawn is filled with weeds, what's on Netflix. We call them low information voters on this show. But that doesn't mean they're ignorant. It means they don't care. So they have little to no information right now on the candidates. They can rattle off Scottie Pippen's free throw percentage or tell you how many three-pointers LeBron James made in the 2023-2024 postseason. These voters aren't stupid. They know a lot of things. But Trump and Biden ain't one of them. Wait till October when they start paying attention. Watch how it breaks for Biden. Listen, I wish I were one of those voters. I wish I could still follow sports. I wish I still smoked dope. I wish my father taught me how to fish instead of warning me nobody will hire a Jew unless they think you'll work twice as hard. I once had a boss who said he only hires Jews because they're all so terrified and paranoid they're going to get fired. I can get twice the work out of them for half the money. In some cases, that could be true. Sweeping generalizations about any group of people is dangerous. So I don't know how to fish. My friend Ethan goes for swims. I go for walks. I don't know how to relax. I follow the elections, and I relax looking at polls now. I care about the elections because elections have consequences, especially if you're black, female, gay, Hispanic, Arab, Muslim, or Jewish, and other groups that I've left out. If Trump wins, liberal, white, male, heterosexual Democrats will feel bad, but they won't feel it. The rest of us will. If Trump wins, the gloves come off. It starts in the Oval Office and then trickles down to every office that you work in, every classroom, every police precinct, every jail, every church, mosque, and synagogue. it becomes less safe, either physically or psychologically, for black people, women, the LGBTQ community, Hispanics, the Asians. I apologize for leaving out the Asians. Arabs, Jews, Muslims. If Trump wins, it gets dangerous for certain protected classes. I shouldn't have to remind you that Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is a fascist. And fascists demonize vulnerable minorities. Why do they do that? Because fascists are incompetent. Fascists train voters to blame others so the voters won't blame the fascists for their own incompetence. Remember Donald Trump crapping the bed on COVID? Who was the recipient of the othering and the hatred? The Asian community. He still calls it the China virus. Blame the Chinese, don't blame me, blame China. That's what Nazis do. Because Nazis are stupid and incompetent. So they find marginalized communities to blame. Life is crap in Florida because of Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is a failure. I've gone over crime statistics, test scores, income inequality, wage growth. He's a failure. So he turns, as fascists do, on the LGBTQ community. That's always the go-to for fascists. He turns on the blacks. He can't go after Hispanics because Cubans vote in Florida, so he goes after the migrants from Central America. Not the Jews, because Florida is where Jews retire. So it should come as no surprise that the leading LGBTQ plus group in America last year issued a travel advisory for Florida. It is not safe to be a member of the LGBTQ community in Florida. Their bathroom laws, their Don't Say Gay Bill laws, their Don't Say Gay Bill laws, their Don't Say Gay Bill. The NAACP issued a travel warning for Florida last year. Leon Russell is chairperson of the NAACP. In June of last year, he called Florida, quote, a home to hate. It is a home to hate. It's where hate goes to live. And then the NAACP officially issued a travel advisory. In June of last year, chairperson of the NAACP, Leon Russell, wrote, quote, our travel advisory is an effort to put the country on notice. If you are black, if you are a woman, if you are an immigrant, if you are part of the LGBTQ plus community, be aware that your life, your full being, is not valued by Florida's so-called leaders. Elections have consequences, especially for marginalized communities. And by the way, Jews in America are marginalized. People hate the Jews. And one of the key components to anti-Semitism, dating back to the Middle Ages, is the insistence that Jews are not marginalized. If you think the Jews are rich and powerful, you may think that's a fact. That is anti-Semitism. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed any of this nonsense, please hit the like button. Please share this with like-minded people. We're thinking of doing a debate watch party. I think it's June 27th. I'm thinking of hosting a debate party on Zoom. It doesn't work won't work on YouTube, and then we'll record an audio version of my podcast where I take your calls, and I'll have some guests, and we'll talk about the debate. Let me know in the comments section. I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about doing a debate watch party, so I'm thinking of doing that on Zoom. And if you don't have Zoom, you can call in. I'll give you a phone number so you can call in and listen if you don't have or like Zoom. If you would like a transcript of today's episode, please go to shopdavidfeldman.com. We have free transcripts now over at shopdavidfeldman.com. It's made possible by the morons who buy the garbage over at shopdavidfeldman.com. I cannot believe some of you idiots bought the crap I'm selling over at shopdavidfeldman.com. I just can't believe it. The Trump fart filtration mask. We're almost running out of Trump fart filtration masks. You idiots. Why would you waste your money on that crap? Well, it's paying so we can organize the transcripts for the show. Don't buy anything at shopdavidfeldman.com. It distracts me. It makes me think I'm going to get rich doing this nonsense. I need to focus on more important things. If you're a fan of the show, if you care about me, don't buy any of this garbage at shopdavidfeldman.com. It's grotesque. It's off-brand. And it's this kind of stuff. This is why I've never made it. It's very self-destructive. So don't go to Shop David. This isn't reverse psychology. When I said this isn't reverse psychology, that was reverse psychology. Free transcripts over at shopdavidfeldman.com. Thank you. I'm going to try to do a show tomorrow because Rudy Giuliani got served papers again, and he's in a lot of pain, and that makes me very happy. Thank you to Bob in the chat room if he's here. Thank you to everybody in the chat room. Thank you.